Hello and welcome to a new episode of Bite-Sized Book History. I'm your host, Allie Alvis. I'm a book historian and rare book cataloger at antiquarian book dealer Type Punch Matrix. Today I'm going to talk to you about the art of judging a book by its cover, publisher's cloth bindings. You may have noticed that the topics of Bite-Sized Book History skew a bit towards the older side. That's because I'm a big fan of what's called the hand press period. As I've mentioned before, and as you can probably gather from the name, this is the period of book production where every element of the book was made by hand. From the paper making to the casting and setting of metal type to the book binding, no element in this period was automated. The hand press period runs from the invention of printing in the West, circa mid-1400s, to around 1840. But why 1840? Blame a little thing called the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution is kind of like the European Renaissance in that it didn't hit all areas or parts of the book at the same time. For instance, machine-made paper became the norm for book production in the early 19th century. But in that same period, the text that made up the book was still set individually piece by hand. The majority of books sold during this period were sold in temporary wrapper bindings, with the assumption that the buyer would later take the book to a professional binder to have it bound in whatever style they wanted, usually leather. But as you can imagine, not everyone wanted to shell out the cash to have their books professionally bound. And the ones in wrappers were definitely usable. You can see that although it has a sort of construction paper wrapper here, that it's still perfectly readable. You can also see the nice exposed spine. You can also see that this book probably was not read very much because it has not fallen apart. This is not a structure that was built to last. By the 1820s, cloth weaving technology had developed to the point that stronger, more durable cloth could be reliably produced. A bookbinder named Archibald Layton is purported to have bound the first book in cloth for London publisher William Pickering. These early bindings were quite plain and didn't sell particularly well, since people were still more familiar with the finished books being covered in leather. Some publishers experimented with embossed cloth in hope of charming customers, which could be patterned to imitate leather or silk, or even patterned with flowers. But in 1832, the imposingly named Imperial Arming Press opened up a world of possibilities for book designers. This press allowed gold and ink to be impressed upon book covers with the pull of a handle, using an engraved brass die. Around the same time, British binders invented something called a case binding. Unlike bindings of the past, in which the boards of a book were attached to the sewing supports that held the book together, case bindings were simply glued to the text block. And in 1868, David McConnell Smith patented the first known book sewing machine, completing the foundation for bookmaking to go fully industrial. The industrialization of the book meant that more were being produced than ever before. But publishers had a problem. How could they make their books stand out amongst the now crowded bookshop shelves? As the production of books grew throughout the 19th century, so did the demand for eye-catching cover designs. Some bindings incorporated illustrations from their texts, but the majority of books needed to be designed from scratch. These designs were initially created by the craftsmen who cut the dies for the Imperial Arming Press. But by the 1860s, publishers had begun to hire artists specifically for the purpose of designing book bindings. These designs ranged from the artfully understated to that classic Victorian maximalist aesthetic, with the art taking up about as much as the binding as it could get its hands on. Travel books were most often guilty of using up cover space like it was going out of style, maybe to better immerse the reader in the text. Many popular books, such as the Bible, the works of Shakespeare, and the works of Jane Austen, went through numerous editions in this industrial book boom. And the cover designs would vary greatly from edition to edition, and from publisher to publisher. As an example, let's take a look at Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, first published in 1813. This is the binding that would have adorned that first edition of Pride and Prejudice if you walked into a bookshop in 1813. And this is probably the publisher's cloth binding design you're most familiar with, the Peacock designed by Hugh Thompson. But there is also this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. I could go on, but you get the picture. Even though all these books contain the same text, the publishers wanted to give readers a reason to buy their edition over anyone else's. I mentioned Hugh Thompson a moment ago, but we only know the identity of a precious few binding designers in what would have been a very crowded artistic field. One of the most well-known binders of that period is Margaret Armstrong, both because of her artistic talent, but also because she signed her bindings. Armstrong was a particularly prolific American artist of the 1890s and early 1900s, whose work graced the covers of books published by Scribner's, Mifflin, Putnam, Dodd Mead, and others. Noted for her floral motifs and Art Nouveau compositions, Armstrong was one of the most influential binding designers of her time. I'm lucky enough to own a couple of bindings designed by Margaret Armstrong. One signed, this Fisherman's Luck beautiful blue Art Nouveau over here, and one not. This Trilby has an extremely goth cover with a heart captured in a spider web. It's unsigned, but we do know it is Margaret Armstrong. Some particularly bright publishers' cloth bindings can be a bit more than the reader bargained for, though. In a small number of cases, vibrant green publishers' cloth bindings have been found to contain arsenic in the form of Paris green. Yellow books have also been found to contain chromium, and many colorful book cloths contain lead. But before you run off to throw away your publisher's cloth bindings and rewatch Name of the Rose, I note that it is very few bindings that have been found to contain this level of poison. The Winterthur Museum's Poison Book Project has a lot more information on this, and I've linked their site in the description below. The bottom line is, unless you're licking your books or your fingers while you're reading your books, the poison books won't kill you. If you want more info on the ins and outs of publishers' cloth bindings, check out the University of Rochester Library's online exhibition, Beauty for Commerce. It's the first link in the description below. That does it for this episode of Bite-Sized Book History. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can keep the drip going of bibliographic content. And check out the description below for links to my Etsy, where I sell these nice, comfy book pillows. They are supportive so you can read your books without the covers flopping open. I will see you next time, and remember, don't bite or lick your books.